Well, I'm joined now by our Thursday panel. Labor MP Josh Wilson and Deputy Nationals leader Perrin Davey join me in the studio. Thank you to both of you for coming in. Josh, significant win for the government today in the lower house, getting that bill through. You're wearing a scarf today dealing with the issue of climate change. Before we get into the substance, talk us through what the scarf symbolises.
Matt, the scarf is part of a sort of an activist exercise, I guess, by grandmothers around Australia through an entity called Common Grace, and they knitted a scarf that actually shows average global temperatures over the last few decades, and obviously this end is where we are now. You know, the last 8 years have been the hottest years on record, so it's a kind of a reminder of the challenge that we face and the need to act, which the government has done today. So
that need to act and the challenge that you're facing, how does Labor tally that position up, that it wants to take greater climate action, that it wants to have this 43% target enshrined in law, when it is also not prepared to commit to not opening any more coal and gas projects across the country, something that the Greens had been demanding throughout this entire debate? They don't seem to sit that well together, do they?
Well, we've been quite clear that we're not interested in seeing new coal and gas powered generation. The Kurri Kurri plant will be transitioned to green hydrogen as soon as it can. We're not going to see new coal and gas fired power generation in this country for a range of reasons that are economic as much as they are about climate change. But you know, what we have done after a decade of inaction is very plain, and it responds to the huge appetite in the community for action, which we know, because of the impacts in Australia and around the world, needs to be taken. So 43% emission reduction target and a range of other changes, restoring the Climate Change Authority to its proper role in terms of oversight and accountability, action on EVs, rewiring Australia, all of these things that have been neglected, and that will help us be part of the global action that's necessary on climate change, and it will reduce power prices in Australia as well and create jobs, particularly in the regions.
Perrin Davey, Anthony Albanese and senior members of the government have described the coalition as being on the wrong side of history here, that it hasn't listened to the electorate after the May election, and that it's being left behind because it's not backing this target.
Look, it's not the target that we're not backing, it's the legislation that we're not backing. The target is already there. The national determination contribution has already been signed. That one of the first things that the Prime Minister did when he took office was rewrite Australia's contribution, and he wrote to the sort of Glasgow panel. So the target's there. We accept the target's there. It's the legislation that concerns us. The Prime Minister said he didn't need the legislation to do it. So why did he bring it in? He's just done it. But the risk of the legislation, and what we've seen internationally with projects, nation-building projects, getting bogged down in court challenges based on targets, this is what we're really fearful. And we also want to make sure that now that the targets are in place, achieving the targets doesn't take primacy over making sure that Australians are safe, secure, have jobs, have industries, and can operate without having this target and without punitive action.
So is it the coalition's position that the nation can't walk and chew gum at the same time, that it can't reach for those much loftier emissions reduction goals without jeopardising those industries? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, there are so many questions still unanswered. I mean, we do need to rewire the nation, but we're already having issues where you've got landowners who are threatening court action against, the power operators, the poles and wires, because they don't want the corridors through their country. We've got the dual-use land issue that hasn't been resolved. I think it can be resolved, but what we don't want is to have the big stick, this is happening whether you like it or not. We need to bring the community along with us. That can be done. I think it can be done. But if it becomes lawyers at 10 paces, it's going to hold everything up.
Josh Wilson, do you think Perrin Davey's got any point there about this does open up a lawyer's picnic sort of scenario? Could there be situations where this legislation is taken advantage of?
No, I mean that's the plain answer, and unfortunately the coalition continues to cast around trying to find excuses to not be part of what is a national imperative. And as the years have gone on, they find themselves in a more and more isolated position. You've got the National Farmers Federation, the Business Council of Australia, Australian Conservation Foundation, Greenpeace. You've basically got everyone except for the National and Liberal parties wanting to see long-belated action taken, and they just keep kind of crawling into a smaller and smaller ball, finding more and more bizarre reasons to say no. And I think that that's a shame. I mean, the reason that we legislated today is because this Parliament and all the representatives that have been chosen by the Australian people should rightly be part of the process of making the commitments to take action on climate change. And it's not just about the NDC that Perrin mentioned, the 43%. It's about the other elements of the bill as well, about having the Minister come and provide an annual report to Parliament, having the Climate Change Authority restore to that position where it's providing accountability. Those things are important. And the whole Parliament has been part of this in a proactive way, with the exception of the Liberal and National parties. The crossbench have been part of it. Obviously, Labor has led it, and we are implementing what the policy that we have a mandate to deliver for the Australian people. But the Liberal and National parties are still trying to find a dark corner to curl up in and avoid what I think the Australian people expect is their responsibility.
Well, I refute that characterisation, because we didn't find a dark corner. We came out last year, we had very robust discussions in both party rooms, and we came out flying the flag for net zero by 2050. We're absolutely on board with a low emissions, clean energy future and with a net zero 2050. What we want to make sure of, though, is that we do it by opportunity. We help see the market market forces take place, but also look for the opportunities. We developed the biodiversity accreditation for farmers. We've worked with farmers to improve soil carbon accreditation issues. There's so many things that we were doing. We saw more solar panels go up on rooftops than was ever seen under the former Labor government. We did not have our head in the sand. We have been making progress. We saw greater cuts to our emissions under our government than we'd seen by the previous Labor government. We're on board for net zero 2050. We did all of that without legislation.
You mentioned that net zero 2050 debate that happened late last year ahead of the Glasgow Climate Summit. That was a pretty tortuous process, though, particularly for your party, the Nationals. There was a lot of tense debate. It's probably downplaying it, but a lot of tense debate about whether or not the party could ever adopt that. And it seems like there is still tension among Nationals ranks and Liberal ranks about whether or not that is actually an achievable position, isn't it?
Well, we got there. The important thing is we got there. As a party room, we got there. And even though people like to comment on the edges about coal and gas projects and what could and should or would be acceptable going forward, we still got there. It's still our target. Our party room is behind it.
Josh Wilson, one person you did manage to get on side from the Liberals was Bridget Archer, crossing the floor, voting with Labor. Do you think there are more coalition members who would like to do the same?
Well, I think there are a lot of coalition members who are hearing that from their community, but Bridget is one person who's obviously taken that to the next step in terms of how she's acted in the Parliament, and I think she's shown a lot of courage in doing that. I mean, Perrin, it's good to hear Perrin say that, in her view, these things need to happen, but there's a big difference between crab walking to the bare minimum. I mean, frankly, Glasgow was a national embarrassment. I mean, to go to Glasgow and have the commitment to net zero by 2050 dragged out of you, but not to turn up as all the other nations did, and as was the point of Glasgow with an improved NDC, was just a matter of national embarrassment, and that has changed. But now, again, rather than sort of reading the tea leaves and seeing what needs to be done, it's, well, you know, we agree to it up to a point, but not this. We think it's a worthwhile thing, but it's being done wrongly. I mean, the Nationals and Liberals are perpetually searching for a way to say no, and for a way to come up with new forms of fear-mongering, and that doesn't. I don't think that does them any credit. I don't think it'll help them politically in the long term. But that's the choice that they continue to make.
I want to move on to another topic today. We heard from the Health Minister, Mark Butler, that he believes we may well be through the peak of the winter COVID cases. Clearly, that's going to be welcome news for many. But how difficult is it going to be for the government to keep navigating this process this pandemic, when you do have new variants popping up all the time. We're still having to talk about whether or not we need further doses of the vaccine. How difficult is it going to be to continue monitoring how COVID is developing, do you think?
Well, I think very difficult. I mean, because we've seen the pandemic over the last 2.5 years. It keeps changing as far as the strains are concerned, and government has to keep responding. But I think what the Minister for Health said was heartening, and certainly the numbers give us a little bit of cause for hope that the winter peak may have been reached. I know that the Minister referred to the sort of the school holiday factor, which needs to be considered. And also, I guess I would just join the Minister and all my colleagues from across the Parliament encouraging people who are eligible to have their fourth dose, to go and have their fourth dose. I'm eligible now, and I've been waiting because I had COVID only a few months ago, but I'll be going and getting it at the first opportunity, and I encourage other people to do the same.
Perrin Davey, do you think there's a risk that complacency could start creeping in here at all, with the general public thinking, okay, we've gone through a wave, you know, the end is nigh, so to speak, when it comes to the pandemic?
Certainly, there is that risk. I mean, I'm very pleased to hear that the wave is hopefully past. I really hope that is true. But you also have the issue where the public is seeing the government start to wind back COVID programs. The government has ceased the rollout of vaccinations in aged care homes, for example, when so many aged care facilities haven't all had their fourth boosters, and we've got higher numbers of COVID occurring in aged care facilities than we ever had during the first and second waves.
Isn't that partly because teams can't get into those aged care homes where there have been outbreaks? They can't go in there too.
Well, it's also the government winding back programs that were in place to try and get to the front of this, and they slammed us when we were in government about not getting teams into aged care facilities, and yet they're walking away from it very quietly. They haven't made bells and whistles about it. They're doing it very quietly and hoping that no one notices. And I think that people are watching and people are noticing, and that helps sort of contribute to the complacency. Like Josh, I think that we need to make sure that people who can and are willing go out and get their boosters, but also everyone should, you know, remember social distancing, respect the virus. It's still out there, but so is the flu. And so are other normal winter conditions. You know, the cold is out there massively. And I think one thing we learnt from the pandemic, we used to take flus and colds for granted, and hopefully we don't get back into that level of complacency.
Briefly, Josh Wilson, feel like I need to offer you a right of reply to what Perrin Davey had there to say about the government's handling of this and these programs.
Yeah, look, I don't know how useful or accurate that was. I mean, I think the last time I was on, we were talking about the provision that the aged care minister has made around the surge workforce, and then also the additional capacity with the ADF. Every effort has been made to ensure that people in aged care are as protected as well as they can be, and enabled to take steps that they need. I know the government's done some further work with the provision of antivirals, for instance, which are critical. So I'm just not sure I can agree with Perrin's assessment there. That's not the way I understand it.
Well, Josh Wilson and Perrin Davey, we do have to let you both go to question time in your respective houses. Thank you for joining us on Capitol Hill.
Thank you.
Thank you.